Okay. Okay, welcome back, guys. Welcome to the GDC class number 14. Thank you for being here like since the beginning of the GDC classes. It's been a history and we're still, progressing and making more games and developing more things in our own games. So yeah, I hope this entire break, I'm just trying to say this physically to front of you most especially those who didn't watch the previous video. I really hope you did have a restful break and really it helped you and it will hopefully helped you inspire more because you got a really restful break. You gave your brain a break itself. So I think the brain is now ready to start, giving all that kind of cool things to you guys as well. Like all that cool ideas. So basically, just to give a brief idea of what happened last week, it's just that we simply learned about the differences between prefabs and instance, because that's a really confusing topic if you think about it. Primarily because a lot of people confuse them, especially when you're trying to make some patches, some updates in your own game. If you found some bugs, you might definitely want to understand that big differences between prefabs and instances because yes, they do overlap a lot, but that doesn't mean they're exactly the same thing. It's the same thing as saying like, hey, there's a the refresh rate in FPS. It's the same concept. Right? It's the same thing. Well, not necessarily. Yes, they do have a lot of similarities. They do overlap often and in many different places, but that doesn't mean that they're the exact same thing. There's still a lot of differences that we need to address for that as well. So similarly, coming back to the point, prefabs and instances also have its own thing. And I think a lot of you guys know that prefab's like a template. So if you make a change to a prefab, then it's gonna make all the changes to the things to all the different objects of that prefab you put in the Unity scenes, right? So you know that if you like make a lot of scenes, you could put you could drag your prefabs anytime you want, but you should always know that anytime you drag your prefab to this Unity environment, to that Unity scene in your game, that's now considered an instance of a prefab. So anytime you make a change to an instance of a prefab, it's only changed to itself, but not to the prefab itself. So we need to understand the ranking differentiation between the prefab and instance. Prefab outcompetes way more than instances. So if you make a change to prefab, it changes all of the instances of the prefab. But if you only change the instance, it won't change other instances in the Unity scenes. Okay, so just keep that in mind. That's the big difference. Then we talked a bit more about uh basically overriding an instance of prefab. So like maybe like let's say you made a change to an instance, then let's say you wanted to apply that change to all the other instances. And remember I told you that like previously that if you just make a change to an instance, it won't change to other things of it. Prefab. Actually it's possible and that button is called an override. And you could if you can check that out. The timestamp is attached to that previous video. If you want to look more into that. We also talked about, rigid body constraints. We did the same thing for the maze game. Like if you were gonna block the rotations from happening, we constrained the rotations for that maze cube so that, once you start moving around, the rotation parts of that thing isn't affected at all. So we did the same thing for the rocket. Like we don't need the z-axis at all for this game because if we do that, it's kind of more like it's going forward, but that's not really the point of the game. You're just trying to go from left to right as if it was a 2D game. So it's kind of like a platformer game if you think of it. It's just that we made it into a 3D version of it to to kind of give that RTX kind of feeling for a 2D old retro type of game, right? So that's what we try to do. If you're still not aware of it, you could check out that video over there. Then we also talk about drag force, a type of drag force a type of feature that you see in rigid body. We talked a bit more about that. That it kind of gives that realism to a rocket. I also thought about how to change gravity. Unity has a really cool feature on automatically changing the gravity of your environment. I also introduced to audio. So the big part of like the previous meeting was audio. So we're gonna like proceed ourselves to learning more about that audio stuff today. So the big thing you need to know is that we basically got an audio file. You could get any audio file you want, because eventually you'll have to submit this assignment in the future. And we put that in the rocket. So the idea was our goal is to make that audio play whenever we press the space button. And luckily there is a thing called audio source. It's a type of component, just like rigid body, just like the transform, all that kind of stuff are components. So is this new thing called audio source. We basically just, put our audio into that audio source. So basically our clip is being referenced by that audio source so that we could use that component in our code to eventually, make a condition where we can only play that audio only when you're pressing the space key, which is, thrusting our rocket up into the air. Right now, at the moment, our goal in the previous video was to just, get in touch with audio. So what we did last time was to make sure that by the end of that video, we should have gotten audio somewhere. You might not see the audio. Like a lot of people told me that you cannot hear that audio at all. And I'm really sorry. It's because I have some audio problems, some things with my recording. So I don't think you were able to hear it. But I think you should be able to hear yours. And I also gave some, debugs and all that kind of diagnostics that you could do in case you cannot hear stuff in your Unity project. Okay, so we'll just come back to that topic again right now and learn a bit more about, how to do that audio thing, how to make that condition only when pressing the space bar key, you can only make that audio play and any other condition other than that space bar, it shouldn't be playing. It should just not be playing at all. Okay, so we'll talk about that today as well. Another thing that we'll be talking about specifically is also switch statements. Okay, you might be a bit confused about it. You might be hurt. You might hear hurt. What am I saying? You might have heard this somewhere in your computer science life, maybe in researching, but you probably haven't gone into it. Okay, and it's completely understandable. This is a beginner course, but it's a bit like if statements, but a cooler way to do it. I'll obviously introduce it today, so hopefully by the end of this meeting, you should have gotten some good brief idea, solidified concept of what a switch statement is. Currently, you don't, and that's the point. If you don't, that's good because you're gonna learn it anyway. So I'm so excited to use that and apply it in our code, especially when you want different conditions to happen with your rocket with just one variable. Okay, and we're also going to talk about MonoBehavior. A lot of people were asking a lot about MonoBehavior. You see that in your code, like you type your public class, and then you have to type a colon, and then you type MonoBehavior. Usually, you don't see that in other programs like Java or C or anything like that. Obviously, not in C, but you get my point. You don't see that but only in Unity, right? Specifically in Unity code. So we'll be talking a bit more about it, and why really that thing exists just briefly, and then we'll also finally talk a bit more about respawn. We obviously did this in our previous project. We found a way to load the scene. So I'm just gonna bring that review that concept a bit more to this game specifically, so that we could apply that ideas and hopefully maybe apply that to your personal project in the coming future for your own games. Okay, so without further ado, let's dive in and let's start the presentation, the main chat. All right, so let's talk about a bit about audio as effects. Basically, the idea, what I wanted to know today is how can we play that audio when you're thrusting, right? We got this audio source component. Let's go back to Unity a bit, like just for a moment. And just to give a brief recap, if I click on this rocket thing, we added a component called audio source. This is a component, just like our script, just like this rigid body, just like this box collider, just like mesh render. So is the transform and the cube mesh filter. All of these are components in the inspector panel. You can access this specifically in the inspector panel. And what we did here is we basically, I did a lot of organization. I hope you also organized your project area as well. I added an audio, which is something I found from freesound.org, if I'm not wrong. I've attached that in the resources channel. So if you ever want to find some free sound effects, you can go over there. But just be careful also of any licensing in case you're ever going to market your game or sell your game. But if you're just making games for fun, that's the best place to get music. So going back to the point, we just dragged this music, or not music, this sound effect into this audio source over here. And basically, there's a lot we can do with audio source. There's, we can loop the thing. We can play on awake, basically saying it'll just start playing once, the scene starts playing. For now, I'll just uncheck this. The reason is because what happens is once we start, putting more code into our, into our rocket, what happens usually is when you turn on play on awake and then you press the space bar, you're gonna actually overlap the sound effects, and it's gonna create that really, really uncomfortable feel of sound in your head because you're actually putting more sound effects together, just making that really loud thing and just not crisp at all. And obviously, just ignore these things down here. We might not go over it now, but like in the future, you could probably consider researching yourself and learning a bit more about that. Okay, and basically that's that. So the idea right now is I've turned off play on awake. Make sure you do turn it off as well. we basically want to cache a reference, right? We want to do what we did to rigid body. We instantiated an object in the code called RB, referenced by that thing called rigid body, right? And then in the start method, we just made that get component thing. It's just like referencing your object to some component, right? So it's a bit this. It's basically the same thing, except now instead of rigid body, you're doing it for audio source. And audio source dot play. Remember, play. Anytime you see a two parentheses, that's an indication that that is a method. So play is a method from this audio source object. Okay, and audio source, it would just be considered a component at this point. So this method is from that audio source component. And basically, what that allows us to do is just basically play the audio anytime this statement is called in your code. And using not audio source, so anytime that's an exclamation, remember exclamation means not in programming. So if it says audio source is playing, if we did not have this exclamation mark, ignore that. If we just type audio source is playing, it's just gonna play, right? Like we're gonna just check whether it's playing or not. But if it's not audio source dot playing, so this would be some sort of condition. If exclamation mark audio source is playing, so the thing is that that condition will only be true if that some audio that you're playing is not playing in the environment. So the not is just basically like saying the opposite version of what it's currently doing in that statement. Now remember, here's another thing. There is no parentheses here. So if whenever there's no parentheses in that after that dot, it's just not considered a method but a property. So remember, there's a property and a method. Know the differences between two of them. And again, if you're still stuck, ask me in the Unity channel, and I'll help. I'll do my best as possible to help clarify on that. But anytime that's not a method, or it's a property basically, because it doesn't have parentheses. You don't really have to know this, but it's really cool to know because it can help you. Yeah, so just know that it's a property, not a method. And then finally, in the end, we need to make some sort of else condition. Okay, so we're gonna make an idea where if in that code where, uh, remember in the movement code, if we go back, there was a place called if we input space. So if we press space, this is actually the code where we need to do that play thing. We need to make that audio source play only at this time, right? But if you do not add that else statement that contains that audio source dot stop, then basically it will just play at all instances as well. So basically, that's just allowing to kind of conclude our code with just saying that it should only be played whenever the space bar is pressed. Okay, so let's actually start coding. We got some idea. So first thing we need to do is, well, we need to instantiate the audio source object. So we basically just do what we did like for rigid body. Just do audio source, and and you could make any object you want. You can name it whatever you want. For me, I'm just gonna make it simple, audio source. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna reference that. So I'm gonna go back here, not go back here basically, but go specifically down here in the start method and reference that object that I made to that audio source component in the object. So let's go here, audio source. And I think it already did it for us. Oh, sorry. I don't want that RB. So audio source equals the get component audio source. It's just basically the same thing we did here for rigid body. It's just instead of rigid body, we're just referencing it to audio source. So now that means this thing has all the properties of the audio source component, and we can access them. So even the methods as well. So down over here, we need to do something where we can basically say that only if it's not playing, then play it, but only with the condition of the space being pressed. So you might be thinking, okay, let's try something simple. Let's just try doing what we might first think in our head. We could just do audio source dot play. And this is actually very easy because what it's saying here is audio source is referring to that clip that we just attached to our thing, right? It's kind of loading right now, just pardon me for a moment. So you can see down over here that we already attached an audio clip to it. So the audio source is automatically just referring to that audio clip, which is so phenomenal if you kind of think of it. It saves you a lot of time when you're making your own program, your own game. And since we're not making multiple audio sources, since we're not referring to many different audios in the game, it's really simple to use audio source.play. But eventually we will change to many different things, but now let's just keep it simple. Okay, so think of it as audio source.play. But our idea is it should only be playing when the spacebar is pressed, but also, since we don't want that overlapping to happen with many, many more spacebars being pressed, we want to make the condition of it should only play if it's not being played yet. So what we can do here is just like what we did, like what I mentioned. I can just say if not audio source dot is playing. Let me just so basically the idea is saying if the audio source is not played yet, basically, then just play it. Okay, and we need to conclude our code from the outside. So where would we put the else stem? You could put it outside, right? Because we want to also mention that if the spacebar is not pressed at all, then just don't play the audio. Okay, so that's just a better way of debugging your game to prevent from any bugs from happening at all in your own game. So this is just a great kind of how do you say practice to do for your own coding, so that to prevent from any bugs from eventually coming in the future. You could have started making more security or at least more encryption in your code to prevent from these bugs from even coming in the first place. So, well, what would we put in the else statement? If it's not, if the space bar is not pressed at all, then what do we do for the audio? Well, we don't want to play it, right? So what we can do is we can do audio source, and instead of doing play, we can do stop. Stop just basically means just don't play the audio. Just stop. Stop it. Get some help. Sorry, I had to say that. So we can basically just add that over here. There you go. And I'm gonna go back to Unity and let's just test this out. I'm really sorry you cannot hear the audio, but trust me, bro. I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna let you know if this is for real happening or not. It should be happening. So it is happening because once I only press the space bar on my computer, that is the only time, not on my computer, but on my keyboard, that is the only time that the thing is being played. So we did double kind of security here if you kind of think of it. If it's not pressing spacebar at all, then never play it. But within the code itself, if it's pressing space and uh, it's not playing it, then only play it. So we don't get that overlapping effect and that really, really uncomfortable sound effect. And obviously, if the sound effect is not that comfortable to hear, that's just going to ruin the player experience, which is something that we always need to be concerned and aware about. Because player experience is very important. Otherwise, your game would be ruined as a whole, even if the idea was amazing. So that's the idea about audio source. Audio source is super, super cool. You can even, go through the code and, you know, and do even much as this and, make more of your own conditions and kind of make it so customized to yourself. You can make any type of games you want. And that's what I'm trying to say, that Unity is a pretty powerful game engine. Even though many people say that, it's a bit of a liability because you're kind of liable to their kind of own environment. That is true, but still, you can see that there's a lot of things you can do with just some of the codes that they just made for us. At least it's a bit better than Scratch because Scratch has a bit less options to do because it's more of a template kind of dragging product, just like what we did with prefabs. Uh, the MIT, the coders over there, they developed a lot of things like prefabs probably for their own things so that you can basically just drag and drop and make your own code, which is still very brilliant, but at the same time, you still cannot make, AAA games like what you could do with Unity. But again, Scratch is just for learning about programming, which is still something that they still are very successful at doing today. Okay, so that's basically it about audio source. Let's kind of move on now. If you still are confused about this, you can always let us know in the Unity channel or even in the comment section on this YouTube video when I'm posting it. So yeah. Also, if you're also wondering how I got this audio source.play, how I got this all these ideas, you can always refer to that Unity documentation. It's a very, very powerful tool, and you should check it out. It's also listed in the Unity resources. Okay, now let's talk a bit about switch statements. Okay, now for the record, let's actually instead of like doing anything, starting even on that subject, let's just start. Let me give you like some really good example before I begin explaining this idea. Okay, so I'm just gonna comment this code out so that it doesn't affect my code at all by any means. So let's kind of consider an idea where let's say we had a variable, okay, and this variable was maybe like let's say maybe a string, who knows? So we can say string name. And let's say that name contained my name, Russell. And let's say like we had um so many different things in our code. Okay. So like let's say if the name equal to Russell, then you want to do something, right? I'm gonna do something like that. And then you made another thing. You made another condition using if statements. That if name equals to RR, do something. And then if name, oops, sorry, if name equals to, I'm really slow right now, sorry. If name equals to GDC, then do something. But you kind of get the idea. I made a lot of different conditions with multiple scenarios. I developed multiple scenarios of like, hey, if 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 the name had this, or if the name had this, or if the name had this, then you do something. Well, actually, there's actually a faster way to do this, and it's called switch statements. Instead of having to do all this hassle, like doing this one by one, you also saw me, like I typed a lot and it still took a lot of time typing itself, right? So then we actually get the idea of switch statements. So let me just go back to the code. Sorry, I was just looking at my phone. Okay. So let's talk about switch statements. So as I said, switch statements is a bit like a conditional if-else statements. And if you're still unaware about if-else statements, I have already made a video on that. You could check that out. I have a timestamp specifically attached to that in one of my previous videos. Okay, so let's actually, if you're still confused about it, just refer to that. But it's just basically if-else statements, but a bit more simplified for you. Because, sometimes what happens is when you're trying to compare just a single variable, but to many different examples, to many different examples, scenarios, and it just, develops a longer list, it becomes a hassle. As I just said, you have to type more, or even if you're copy pasting, that takes up a lot of time as well eventually. Because you need to still change the numbers in between. And sometimes when you're specifically with a string, it's very case sensitive. So you need to be more careful. And because of that, the carefulness and being very meticulous with each letters, it takes up a lot of time, basically. So basically, what switch statements allow us to do is just basically just use cases and just basically use the switch thing to simplify our task even more. So if there's like case, and then you type whatever you want, and then case whatever you want, and below that you just type the do something part, because the case is just a bit like that if state, and the variable you have already referred to that as a parameter in the switch. Let me explain a bit more. This is how a backbone of a switch statement looks like. It starts off with just switch, and over here, you type the variable to compare. So this is the variable that you're going to compare whatever you put over here. All right. So basically what that means is like, it's like just saying, if variable to compare, what I just did here, equals to value A. So it just simplifies your code even more. And you might be asking, what is this break? So break is a bit like a period, a full stop. It's just like an ending to a sentence. So basically, your code, your program, the language itself doesn't know where to stop. So you tell them where to stop by typing the word break. And they notice that, okay, once you start putting break, they're no longer going to look at stuff over here. They're going to exclusively just end it from here onwards. So it's kind of like that exclusivity thing. And if you ever want to make more sentences, more stuff into your sentence, then just make a new sentence, right? Or in other words, a new variable to compare. So what we're going to do here is you're going to use it for collision, okay? We're going to use the switch statement, and basically we're going to print that whatever we did, like debugging, to the console itself with different messages based on how the collision happened, right? And we're going to use this thing again, like tags. We're going to come back to tags, and that's going to be the variable we're going to compare with. We're going to put that, let me just go back. We're going to put that over here, the variable to compare. Okay, that tag itself. And then we're going to compare with different tags available, and then it's going to do different outputs as it's intended to do so. And just remember that this variable, whatever we're going to put in that variable to compare, it's going to be this thing, other.gameObject.tag. This is the way to reference the tag that the current game object is having. Or if you're going to use OnCollisionEnter, that's going to be a whole new different thing. That means if you're going to put other Uh, other in that scenario means anything that's in the environment. So you're gonna refer to the game, like that other game object environment that you collided with, and its tag specifically. And from based on what tag it is, you're gonna get a different response in your console. And that is the main idea of how we're gonna apply, that type of collision, that type of switch statements into our game to mess with collisions and basically simplify it even more. Okay, so before we actually start, we should understand the main differences between UnityEngine and MonoBehavior. Basically, UnityEngine, if we go back to our code, you see that, usually in your own code, you see this kind of grayed out and this one more highlighted. The reason why it's highlighted is because you're able to use this thing called MonoBehavior. Now, you might be asking me, what is MonoBehavior? Why is that thing over there? Well, it is over there because MonoBehavior is a type of class exclusive to Unity codes that allows us to use amazing methods like void start and void update. If you ever wondered, Java uses that public static main void, which is very, very long. But they kind of just simplified it for us by doing void start, and that's what MonoBehavior is. It's just simplifying code for us for Unity programming. Because obviously, if we're going to use this in daily C# lives, it's not going to help us any. This is exclusive for Unity, basically, if you kind of think of it, and it's kind of not like an intentional thing. It's just there unintentionally because, well, you cannot use void start, void update anywhere else other than Unity. And that is why we have MonoBehavior, because it just simply helps us simplify our code and really do what we can and what we can with making games in a more simplified manner. Okay, and that's what's mentioned here. We can basically use start methods and update method, which is basically just truly essential for making our Unity game. So let's before we actually start anything, let's actually sorry, I think I've been ahead of myself. Let's actually start using our collision situations. Okay. So first thing, what we need to do is we need to make our environment filled with tags. We did this basically for our. I was in the game panel. Sorry. We did this basically for our previous project. Like we made the obstacles get a different color, and we did that by changing the tag of it and accessing that in our own code, and basically doing what we can. So if you're still concerned about how to use collisions and stuff, you can again refer to that other videos that we made, and I've explained it really well over there with the timestamp attached. Okay, so first of all, what we need to do is perhaps give the obstacle itself something, So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a tag. So if you want to ever create a tag and you're still confused about how to do it, go over to tag and click on add tag. And over here, just click on this plus button and just make that new tag what you want. So I'm gonna call my new tag um, obstacle. Okay, I'm gonna make it very simple for me, especially. Okay, and let's just go back and let's give that thing the obstacle thing. So it's over here. Let's just give that the obstacle tag. Now let's see what else can we do here. We also want some, friendly kind of thing. So if we hit it, in case we hit that thing, it will not affect us. It will not kill the rocket. Like for example, some good examples would be like this. This is a friendly object because if I hit this, I shouldn't get hurt at all by any means because this is where I launch. This is my launch pad. So if you kind of think of it by logic, you shouldn't make that thing an obstacle. So let's make another tag, and we're gonna call that tag friendly. Okay, and I'm gonna go back to my rocket and uh, give this specific blue obstacle a friendly tag, just like friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Okay, and over here, this green thing is the goal. So usually, you could either make the tag goal, or Unity has already made it for us, which is finish. Okay, so we're gonna use the finish tag instead to simplify our work even more. Okay, and I think I can also consider this thing to also be the obstacle as well, the ground itself, because obviously the rocket shouldn't be touching the ground by any means. And obviously in the future, I'll be teaching you how to make this more decorated. Right now, I'm just simplified it for you so we could understand way more about how to use, our collisions. Okay, now the first thing is I need to tell you that we cannot put our collision thing in the movement script. The movement script has its own meaning, which is to let the rocket move. So there's no meaning to put the collision stuff, the collision management things, in the movement script. So we should have a new script for that, and we're going to call it the collision handling, collision handler. You could also call it collision management. I call it collision handler. You could call it whatever you want. So make a new script, and let's go back to Visual Studio Code and go to that code. Right now, we don't actually need these things because we're going to use Unity's another of Unity's very famous tool, and I think you're familiar with it. It's called void on collision enter. And we could type this collision, and we're going to type other. So basically, other is that thing we're referencing. The other thing is the other things that are in the environment that is colliding with that object itself. So obviously, this on collision enter script will be attached to the rocket script because obviously that script is just managing what the rocket is touching and not touching and how to respond to different things in that scenario. Right? So that's the idea. Now, what do we do? Well, let's actually start with using switch table. So we're going to start with switch, and inside we're going to put whatever that variable we're going to compare. And as I said previously, it's going to be other like game object dot tag. Basically, we're trying to access or reference the tag of the object that you collided with, basically. All right. And what we're going to do is we're going to basically make different cases. Okay. And these cases are like if this current tag if that outsider thing that you collided with, that rocket collided, if that tag is either friendly or if that tag is either an obstacle or the goal, we're going to respond differently. So let's actually start that right now. So let's start with the first case, which is friendly. Now, be very careful with these case sensitivity because tags are case sensitive, which means you need to spell it as precisely as possible. You cannot put lowercase f, otherwise Unity will not realize what it is. So we actually have to go back and check and make sure that Unity uses friendly. So yes, it is friendly. So let's go back to our code, and basically let's put whatever we need to put there. So what we can do right now is we're going to use the console. So let's use debug.log. We're going to use debug.log whenever we want to type a message or send a message to the console. This is especially when you're like beta testing your games and when you really don't want the actual output to happen, but rather just make sure that the logic is correct before you actually implement it in your game. It's a really good tool, as I mentioned before. So maybe friendly is like we can tell the user that this is a friendly object. Okay, and then what we can do in the next line, remember, whenever you want to finish a sentence or tell C# that this is it after that, just type break. Now let's type another case. Okay, another case that we need to do is obstacle. And let's actually make sure that we we spelled that obstacle thing correctly. So let's go over here, and yes, it's capital O obstacle. Got it. Now what we can do is instead of typing it again, remember one thing I told you, copy paste. Although you look cool programming and typing stuff, time is still important. So what do we do for obstacle? We need to tell the user that this place, whenever you touch this obstacle, it's not good. So usually what my logic is for this code, did I get hurt or something? So basically what the logic for this code is specifically is that, I don't know why someone sent me a message. The logic of this obstacle code is just simply that we're trying to basically make the rocket itself blow up and not make it use again, right? You make it go back to where it was to its current level, so that it doesn't do any nonsensical things that you don't want it to happen. So the idea is for now, what I'm trying to tell you is the rocket died. It's basically that once we hit any obstacle, we will go back to that current level again and play that thing again as many times until it's not hit by that obstacle. And obviously getting to that goal place to proceed to the next level. So what do we need to say here? We could just say the rocket blew up. So that's just trying to indicate the user that okay, the rocket has blown up. So that's not cool. So yeah. And then finally, we can make another case, which is something that I think I've added, and it was, if I'm not wrong, finish. And finish is basically that thing, which is the goal. I made the goal cube get the finish tag. So whenever I have collided with any object that has the finish tag, which is basically the goal, I want to basically go to the next level, right? So for now, I'm gonna say, congrats, you have leveled up or something, right? and then basically just type break to finish off your statement. And then there's another thing you need to be aware of. It's called default. Default is basically like saying that if you basically don't have any of these things happening, default is the current state of that object tag. So usually, the problem with switch statements is you're not giving an actual indication of what you're trying to compare it, right? Because you have so many different scenarios of thoughts of how you want to compare those tags. So default tag is just saying that this is like basically the normal thing that you're going to be comparing it all the time if these things are not being compared. So for now, we can just say that a debug.log. And I think I did something wrong here. I didn't really have to do it. But I don't think we need it because honestly, I mentioned obstacle. But usually what happens is if you have a lot of fuels and a lot of other things in your games, uh, usually what we don't do is we don't want to tag the obstacle itself because you can just put that in the default and make it go as you want it to go. All right, but for now, I already made a thing called obstacle, so I think we're good to go. So let's go back to Unity and test our game, basically. All right, so let's just open our console tab and proceed to playing the game. So let's actually touch the blue thing over here, and if it's not being touched, then something is wrong. So wait, hold on. Hmm, this is not normal. Let me see if I've saved the file because that's usually the problem as well. Okay. So this thing has the obstacle. This thing has the obstacle. That is not normal. Okay, this has the finish. This has the launch pad, so it has friendly. Let's see what I did wrong because like usually it should work. It's also a good time to debug your game. On collision. Okay, so this has on collision enter, collision other, switch to other. Yes, so this we're comparing. It's really sus. Um, what I could do is I could maybe try default. So instead of typing obstacle, we could try just saying that you sorry you blew up and put a sad face, I guess. I don't know. And I break. Let's see if I think it should work. Hmm, not normal. Oh, okay, okay, I was dumb. Okay. I forgot to tell you one thing. We did not attach the script, okay? Oh my god, big brain. Just basically what you want to do is just attach it to your rocket. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get the code at all. If you don't put your your script into your component, your object, it's not going to do anything at all, obviously. Uh Common sense, Russell. Anyways, but basically the reason why I put collision I thought there was a ghost behind me. Okay. The reason why we the reason why we had we put the collision handler inside of this rocket is because the rocket is basically the thing that's basically deciding what to collide it and what is the reaction to what it's going to be colliding with, right? Because like the rocket itself is the thing that's moving. It's the main character in the game. So basically that's the thing that's going to decide what's it going to collide with, right? You're the thing that's going to probably decide that, hey, I'm going to collide with the obstacle. I'm going to collide with this. I'm going to collide with that. That's the main idea. So what I'm going to do here is basically let's try it. Let's go to console. If I touch this thing, and I'm pretty mad. I don't know why it's not doing it. Hold on. Something's really wrong with my code right now. For now, let's try implementing the idea of reloading your game whenever you hit this obstacle thing, right? But if I don't figure out a way to like do that, that's gonna be a problem because hmm, basically the idea was I was gonna say I was gonna create some sort of method that allows you to reload the level. So like basically the idea is like I make a method called reload level, and then I make a not a method here, but like outside called public, or I actually don't need to. I can just make it void reload level, and basically the idea is inside of this uh I'm gonna just do scene manager. Now the thing is we're gonna use scene manager, so we're gonna have to using UnityEngine.scene management. I think it's management. Yeah. And then scene manager dot load scene, right? We're gonna load some scene, and we're basically gonna do scene manager basically dot get active index. If you're still not aware of what this is, not get active scene, get and I mean like get active scene, and we basically want to access the build index because we're gonna access the value of that thing, not the name of the scene. Okay, and we can close our code off. But there's actually a more simple way to do this. Actually, that you can just do the in current index, so like current scene index. Basically, what we can do instead of like putting this very complex code over here, like this complex statement, we can just store that value inside of this variable, which is an integer. So the idea is I can just type current scene index. So that's just going to help you simplify at looking at the language and at the code itself. So whenever you're trying to patch a game, let me just put that there. Basically, the thing is, it's going to help you ease out the reading because this is more easier to read compared to what I showed you last time. Um, but the idea is like I'm supposed to reload the level whenever I collide with something. Now the problem is I don't know why it's not colliding with something. It's probably because maybe like I had some problem with my box collider or something. That could have been a reason. So I could check that out right now. Yeah, let me see what I can. I'm gonna spend like this entire day trying to figure out what I did wrong. But yeah, so the idea about respawning, I can talk about it a bit. It's just basically like using your load scene, that same thing I talked about, and you're basically using the Unity engine.scene management. You're using that. You need to add that on top of the code so that you could use all the properties and methods of that class basically, and things like load scene method and basically the scene manager class itself. Um, you can do all that cool stuff and basically allow you to load scene basically. But one thing sometimes a lot of people miss is the fact that you have to go to build settings, and I think one reason was because I did not add an open scene. But make sure you do add an open scene because you need to add the current level that you're working on, so that Unity knows that what scene is currently each thing, so that once you're using the levels, they can know the index, as I've mentioned in the previous videos of this class of this build index. So maybe I think that was the reason, but I don't know. I'm still not aware. Let's try it. I'm not sure. Oh, wait. Okay, I think someone. Wait, let me try it. Hold on. Thanks, IQ. I think I did something. I think that is the reason. Hold on. I think that is the reason. Wait, let me let me just go back to the main chat. Okay. So, can you guys see the screen? Let's just try it. I think that was the reason. Sorry. Yes, that was the reason. Thank you, IQ. That was really helpful. So yeah, if you move and you touch any obstacle, as you can see, this thing is default. So anytime I touch this or the ground, I'm gonna go back to the origin to the level itself, which was the current scene index. So so let's say I move around. I move very carefully, like a cool gamer. But once I've touched this, it's gonna get a different message, which is you have leveled up. But if I go to this blue thing, you saw that this is a friendly object kept on coming up every time I touched it. But yes, thank you very much. Yeah. Oh, did I? Is that I'm really sorry. I'm so dumb. How did I not see that? But thank you for addressing it. That was really good. So yes, that again talks about case sensitivity. Be careful about how you use your each method. Everything is capitalized that it's supposed to be. Otherwise, you're gonna get big oof like what just happened to me. Okay, so in today's video, what we talked about is basically just going more on the audio thing. How to condition these audio sources, these audio things. Why these how to use the specific audio clips at certain conditions, like when I press spacebar only, that is when the sound should come, especially for thrusting and in rockets. We also talked a bit more about like switch statements, this new concept about if else statements that you'll soon maybe learn in your AP computer science courses. um, but they're really helpful. They help simplify your code whenever you have so many multiple scenarios in your conditioning. And finally, we talked a bit more about collisions, how to apply that switch statement in our collisions, and also how to use the idea of respawning in the collision itself by using that get active scene index idea and the scene management. Um, Again, really sorry. I think I was really lost midway. I forgot to realize that I did not capitalize that O. So I think someone had asked just before I end the meeting. Let me just clarify. So I think IQ asked, I'm confused why Unity didn't have a pop-up saying yes, and that's a very good question. So Unity usually doesn't. If it's for case sensitivity, they're really bad at noticing these things. Sometimes if you do have really good extensions, I need to. Yeah, it's also because of custom functions. Thank you for addressing that, Oli. I have some of my custom functions, and especially if you're using Visual Studio Code with so many like custom, especially custom themes specifically, then it's going to cause a bit of problems whenever you're trying to debug with your code. Uh, don't worry, IQ. I'm gonna share the code about reload level. You could watch the video again. Also Oli, sorry about that. But yes, thank you very much for staying with me throughout this video and seeing me stressing out throughout this entire video, realizing that it was just this letter O that I had to capitalize. So I'm gonna end this meeting here right now. So thanks, guys, and I'm gonna see you in the next meeting. Peace.